Everybody, welcome back to the cabin. This video is going to be a little bit different than my standard. First of all, I'm talking, which I haven't been doing on this channel much, but I want to share a little bit more of my overall vision for my life and for this property with you guys. And I can't think probably redirect you or direct you over to some of the other platforms that I'm posting this on. YouTube, Shawn James channel for one thing, and Patreon exclusive content, and also earlier content and less edited, so longer form, and then Rumble as well. But what I want to focus on specifically this year is sharing a lot more of that vision for my life and my property. And really what I would say probably more than anything is that I've kind of using permaculture principles to run my life. But one of the things is power, electricity, and heat and everything else. So storing energy, collecting and storing energy essentially. Because I'm so far off grid, like there wouldn't even be an option ever to get electricity to this cabin. It's too remote, so I have to always use renewable energy or energy sources other than what I can connect to the grid to get. So for me, solar is what I've chosen. This stream, I get a lot of suggestions that I could use this stream for hydropower. It's inconsistent. It's flooded right now because it's spring, high water conditions. It's a little bit higher than this, but it's going to slowly now drop to the point where it's going to be almost stagnant, just barely moving by August. So inconsistent, and then of course it's mainly frozen for half the year almost up here. So that's not a viable source. The wind is variable as well. I'm in a forest, not like I'm in an open field where I have consistent winds coming through. And even if I put out a wind turbine out there, I'd have to get the power back here, which is a bit inconvenient, but also then I have to maintain that wind tower, and I'm just not interested in doing that. So I've chosen solar as the primary source. I do have a generator, as you've seen in some of the videos, hooked up to the back of the cabin that feeds into the battery storage bank in the cellar of the cabin. I try not to use that very often. In fact, I'm going to use it less and less because I'm reducing even further the amount of energy that I use. It's very limited what I actually use for electricity. That freezer is one of them, but it's 12-volt freezer that's super insulated and draws hardly any power. It's amazing. I can let that battery die or disconnect it for, I've gone as long as a week and not had it the temperature drop down, or like nothing started to thaw in it, let's put it that way. It's really full, and it's in the cellar where the temperatures are really low and stable. So energy is one of those things. So recently, our two daughters, Emily and Erin, moved into different apartments about 3 hours from here. So to help them settle in, we're bringing some groceries down basically to them. So from the freezer here in the cellar, got some venison steak, some beef that we butchered last year. So got 2 steers down there, so grabbing that. Some butter, some vegetables, and bunch of vegetable seeds. So Emily's starting a garden in the back of their rental apartment. They're living in an apartment at a house though, so they have a decent sized backyard, and they've been granted permission to do a full vegetable garden there. So I'm going to bring some seeds down to her as well. Cooler will keep everything, of course. Well, the fridge portion of this thing that I have set at 5 degrees Celsius, I can put the butter and the seeds in that section, and then in the other section I can put the frozen meat in it. So not only will it stay cool and cold, frozen in that case on the frozen meat side, it will cool it back down. It actually, within 30 minutes, it would take the food from about 25 degrees Celsius down to say 0, if that's what we set it at. But it's, like I said, I set the fridge at 5. The freezer portion I've got at -15. So that venison and other meat will go into the freezer section. The refrigerated stuff will go into what I've got as a refrigerator temperature section. And there's no rush for them to get it into their freezers and make room in their fridges and freezers as they're trying to move in and settle in, so they can actually just keep it in this cooler. So that's really convenient. So this is the 50-liter version. I think it's their biggest cooler, and it'd be enough space to go camping for the weekend or whatever, or leave this kind of stuff in it of this quantity for that long. The battery actually will last about 20 hours in this size cooler, set at those temperatures, and then it can be charged 3 ways. It'll plug it into the wall, plug it into the lighter in our car or in one of the cars, or use a solar panel. You can hook the solar panel directly up to it, and then within 4 or 5 hours it's fully charged again, and you get that 20 hours again of battery time. Battery comes out easily. You can take it inside to charge it, or plug directly into the cooler itself. If you have a solar panel, for example, that would be convenient, just to have it set up at a campsite with a solar panel beside it, so it's continually charging. Now, why not just use a regular cooler with ice? I know for me, I hate using coolers with ice because everything just gets soaked as the ice melts. And you know, if you leave a plug open so that it can drain on a slope, you're still going to get some water, but you end up letting more warm air in too. So I just hate using a cooler like that. So I think this is pretty ingenious, actually, to have a battery powered one. And you're not dealing with that water draining everywhere too. So like, I would put this in the back of my truck, or even in the back seat of the truck, and they'll probably put it in their trunk or car. Well, you don't want ice water melting and going all over the vehicle, of course. So you can't leave the plug out. So if you leave the plug in, everything again gets soaked. So this works way better than that for me. These vegetables have been storing them since last year, so they're still, most of them will still be viable, but Emily can sort through them and then figure out which ones she wants to plant in her vegetable garden this year. And then we'll use the other ones for a family garden, probably. The other thing with ice, obviously, is that if you're on an extended, say even a weekend, but if you're any longer than that, the ice just doesn't last. So if you don't have a place to go and pick up new ice, then you end up, and this has happened to me lots of times, by the end of that time you're eating things that haven't been kept cold. So you might have bacon or eggs or something, or sausages or some other meat in the cooler, and by the time you're getting around to eating it a few days later, your ice is gone and it's warm and it's maybe not safe to eat still. So with the option, either, like I said, if you were near your car, you would plug it into your car, or if you had a solar panel, you just plug the solar panel in. A 100-watt panel. I think they actually offer one. I didn't get it yet. I think you probably will, and maybe look at some of their other products as well. But it would be very convenient to have that solar panel just continually charging. As far as a workstation for cooking and preparing food and stuff, little tray that pops out here, it's kind of convenient. It can also be used as a handle to drag the thing. Bottle opener right here, if you use bottles still for anything. We did get it for the girls to share, because they can use it for camping, but we're thinking about all the ways we could use it too, so I'm not 100% sure we want to give it up, but I guess they're going to use it more. But we could use it for road trips. We've got a couple of trips planned, my wife and I, this year in Cali. Planned this year to drive around and explore some places in Canada, so it would be handy to have that. Like I said, in the back of the truck, and just plug it into the lighter at times, or have a solar panel, so that would be convenient for that. But also for here, even if we ran out of power, I didn't want to fire up the generator to make sure the freezer was running, or the fridge, or the ice box. If it was really warm this summer, it might be handy to just use this as a fridge. Now, Acre is they're an established company, and they have other products, but this is pretty new to them, and they're offering a discount then to people who sign up under the Kickstarter program. I think they're going to start shipping them in June, so you want to jump on this pretty quickly. But it's a 35 or 40% discount to buy through the website right now, depending on what option you go with. Anyway, I'll put the link in the description below and you can go and check that out. But it's pretty limited time offer, I think, because they are starting to ship in June of this year, 2023. All right, I'm going to throw this on the ATV and get it back out to the truck, and we're going to make the long drive down to visit the two of them and drop off some of this meat in the cooler. And hopefully it works out for them. It's not very warm out right now, but nevertheless that went down in temperature really fast. It's already at 4 degrees and minus 11. 4 degrees is what I set the one side at, and minus 15, so it's just about there already. So that stuff I just took out of the freezer and the root cellar is going to be at the right temperature immediately. What I'm going to show you today and what I'm working on right now with a forestry consultant is what you'd probably call zone 4, and that's the land sort of well beyond the footprint main living area of the cabin into the forest over there. Like, that's all mine. And what he did, the forestry guy did, was mark that southern boundary for me. So there hasn't been a survey here for 150 years, so we're kind of going off some town maps and crown land maps and stuff. Anyway, mark that, but now I know where I can start improving the property and managing the forest for optimal health and wildlife habitat mainly, but also to start incorporating more food for people as well as wildlife, but also to improve the health of the trees, the health of the forest itself. You'd be surprised how unhealthy a forest can actually get, where you think it's optimal, or you think it's should achieve climax on its own, become a climaxed forest, but that's not actually the most productive forest. You want something that's got diversity of habitat, diversity of species, thin enough that the sunlight's getting through and allowing things to grow, and not full of diseased trees and crowded trees and bug infested trees. You want your trees to be healthy so that they're more resilient against climate change and weather pattern, immediate weather issues like freezing and windstorms and things like that, but also from insect and disease. So that's what I'm focusing on this year in particular, as well as finishing building the actual homestead. But the land itself, I'm going to increase my efforts to improve the quality of the landscape. That's also going to include the garden here as well, of course, getting some more fruit trees and nut trees planted, and thinning out a little bit more, getting some cover growing in this area and so on. So I'm really excited about it, and I hope people will follow along and try to learn along with myself. I know quite a bit about what I'm doing, and I'll share that obviously, but I'll tell you where I'm just learning it for the first time too, and how I'm applying that newfound knowledge. And I'm never going to know it all, and I'm not going to already have that experience and know how to manage a forest that is so complex and beyond the hand of man. But anyway, I'm going to do my best to improve things, leave it for the next generations in better shape than I found it, and to maximize our enjoyment and health while we're here. So this is the property line, my south boundary, and you can see over there too. So this property hasn't been surveyed in 150 years, so I've been hesitant to do much along the property lines in case I stepped onto the crown land, the public land. Completely surrounded by public land. But now that I'm doing forestry management and habitat improvement, I need to know where the boundaries are so I can do improvements on my side of the boundary, so within my property. And identifying each of the boundaries has been important, so forestry consultant has been marking this, well, all of the boundaries, but south one here, then he'll be doing the north the next day that he's out here. So it's nice to get a better sense of the property dimensions and locations. It's There's a lot of good habitat along this edge here, but what I need to do is create more habitat edge and clear back some of this, all this conifer growth on the edge of these clearings. So this edge cover needs to be sort of cut back in order to encourage more shrubbery, more intermediate layer stuff and lower stuff, so that the wildlife can have food. Because immediately you get into this bare ground back here where no sun's getting in past these conifer needles, so no sunlight hits the ground, so nothing regenerates, and so literally no tree regeneration, which is a concern, and also no ground cover or ground herbs and stuff for wildlife to eat. But it's the main reason that the beavers are no longer here. As you can see, Callie is in the creek, but this used to be flooded, this entire creek. This is the creek that flows in front of the cabin in the garden. So this was probably many times over the millennia have been dammed up and used as a beaver pond. But because there's no food here now, with all this conifer growth, there's nothing for them to eat. So what could happen is young beaver could move in here in the spring, dam it, and then find out that there's nothing to eat, so then they end up perishing. So I need to, like I said, well, I don't need to, but the best way to manage this would be to cut this perimeter back into the forest a little bit, allow the sunlight to get in there in the higher, drier ground, and have some trees regenerate or some deciduous stuff to grow. So I haven't talked to John, the forest guy, since he surveyed this part of the property, but I'm guessing these massive pines here behind me that are probably 150 years old, so somehow, well, probably regenerated from the initial cut when the property was first developed 150 years ago. So these would have been seedlings that cropped up after they likely clear cut this. We were thinking that part of the front of this property might have been pasture because there's no stumps visible at all. Not even like old, I forget what you call it, basically the mounds from rotten stumps or rotten logs laying on the ground. It's none of that. And it's completely flat and not regenerated at all in some spots. And he's thinking that's from compaction from probably cattle or horses pastured there, which is hard to believe when you see this forest and see how little activity there is in this area now that it was ever used for that purpose. But it sounds like it was from all the research I did. But these things, I'm guessing that a logger would identify like every second pine here. There's 3 in a row there, and 2 of them the crowns are starting to touch. I'm guessing you would say take out the middle one, which would allow the next generation, which is probably 50 years younger, to grow up stronger, but utilize one of these great big things for timber. Now that one's pretty curved, so less value. That one's pretty straight, but I'm not interested in doing that. I want to keep this old growth stuff. I think they're sparse enough in here to just let them go, that they're not gonna, that I can create other sunlight pockets by taking out less mature and less quality stuff, like maybe some of the birches or great big poplar or aspen right there. It's actually dead anyway or dying. So take some of those lesser trees out, lesser quality trees, utilize them for lumber or firewood or whatever, or for brush piles for wildlife, and then let the big trees have that much more room to continue to grow. So that's what I'm kind of leaning towards. This is a bit of an example of what happens when you open up the canopy. So for whatever reason, there's less crown up top, so less closed canopy, less mature trees. That aspen is massive though. It's one of the biggest ones I've seen in my area. But other than that, it's a lot of lower stuff, but you can see at ground level all these balsam firs, which are really shade tolerant, the most shade tolerant. What's happening is that wherever the canopy does start closing, that's the only species that's regenerating, which is not really great for the forest because it doesn't provide that much. The moose have killed almost all of it. They're browsing it, so they like it. But once it gets to a certain height, it's kind of useless to them too. So it's not an ideal species for forest to become mostly that. And that's what happens if you get all this balsam fir growing up, and then that's the main species at the replacement level. As all these mature trees start dying from old age, disease, or whatever, or blow over, this species, the balsam fir, becomes a monoculture. It's all that because that's the species that's been growing under the understory. So when the sun comes through, that's already so much more established than the shade intolerant trees. So you get this balsam fir thicket that's not as good for wildlife. So we're trying to discourage that. So by opening the canopy more so that in areas that the balsam especially aren't already established, opening it up so that other more shade intolerant species like oaks, I would prefer to have a lot of oak here for wildlife and people food, and other nut species, and instead of these balsam thickets. You can see right here, quite thick. It's good for a cover, but not so much food for wildlife. That's the other thing that happens to the balsam firs. They're so weak that they end up breaking off and creating a lot of ground debris, which is fine for wildlife habitat, for organisms at ground level. But like I said, not the most productive. So they're weak, not great for timber value, which you do have to manage properties for timber value too, because people use wood products, so we need to get them from somewhere. And the more private woodlots you can get wood from that are properly managed, the less you need to go in and do massive extraction from wilderness areas, right? So if we want to protect wilderness areas, that means we have to get our wood and lumber products, tree products from forests that are managed. So it would be almost irresponsible for me not to manage this property properly. I'm just a steward too for my generation, right? I'll have this property until I'm gone, but somebody else has to take over after me and forevermore. So I want to leave it, pass it down to the next generation in as good a condition as I possibly can. This is a really good example at a really good time. The sun is peeking through there because a balsam fir died right there. It's laying on the ground. That allowed sunlight to get in here, and this is all the deciduous stuff that popped up in the sun pocket, or grew up, and the moose are browsing on it. So it immediately created habitat, created in this case food for moose and for deer, and grouse. They'll be eating the bud. So that's what you want, some pockets of sunlight reaching the forest floor, so you get some regeneration of different species, but also browse for the wildlife immediately. A lot more succulent stuff. You can't eat trunks. Well, the moose are, but well, that's a good example too. That's a red maple, and they actually strip these trunks, strip the bark off and eat them, but the browse is better for them. Well, that's for moose, stripping that off with their teeth and eating the bark. But the twigs are better. And other wildlife can eat the twigs where they can't eat that bark so much. So I haven't talked to the forester, like I said, since he was in here doing this part of the forest, but I bet he would say this little grove of 10 or 15 pine trees needs to be thinned, and I would agree. If you look at the crowns quickly, they're really narrow and they're touching, which means the trees aren't absorbing the most amount of sunlight for their size, especially, that they could be. So if you were to take out a bunch and leave, say, 25 feet even between trees, that would allow those crowns to get much wider on top, and that would increase the girth of each of the trunks that much more, and that much more quickly. They would grow faster. So again, timber extraction. So to get some value out of the property right now, to either sell or utilize that lumber, which I do need some more lumber, but also so that 50 or 100 years from now, the timber quality just keeps improving. And also, in the meantime, sequestering carbon through more rapid growth from those trees. Especially because when you consider that the wood is not getting combusted. So if I cut these trees down, cut them into lumber, and then use them, that carbon, if you're concerned about that kind of thing, is sequestered in that piece of furniture, let's say, or building. And then everything that grows up in its place is sequestering more carbon. So it's actually good to cut trees down in a forest like this for the climate, but also for wildlife and for the health of each of these individual trees. Left like this, they're stressed, and they could end up just getting diseases and die, or be susceptible to pest damage. So it's better actually to make the remaining trees healthy and remove the less healthy ones, or to take some good ones and allow the other ones to improve in health, which they will do. So there's some big spruces right here, but these pines some of them are quite good. And some of them are not so good. So there's some twisty ones and branched ones that might make sense to take down and just use part of the tree for lumber and leave the rest for wildlife and for the ecosystem. Absorb back in, like rot on the forest floor. Make brush piles for small game and birds and stuff to nest in and to hide in from predators. Like this. So maybe that tree comes out because it's thin and also has a double trunk, which is just going to get diseased at some point and die. So like I said, if you are interested in this, and I hope you are, because it really is important to all of us, to humanity, and to the environment, to the wildlife, and then you can go to one of these other platforms that I've listed below and follow along. I put out these bird boxes down here too, so I see forget the name of the species of that bird, but it nested inside the breezeway last year, and I let it raise 2 broods in there successfully. And now that I've finished the cabin, it can't get in. It's, I think, making a nest in the unfinished part of the soffit on the back of the cabin. So I'm going to leave that soffit unfinished until it finishes nesting, raising its brood, and then I'll close that in. Anyway, I better get back to work. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you back here at the cabin next time. Take care.